In the last episode, Bernard Arnault butchered a bankrupt empire called Boussac Saint-Frère. He fired 9,000 workers. He stripped the carcass down to the bone. And he walked away with the only thing that mattered. Christian Dior. France called him the Terminator. The newspapers called him a monster. The unions called him a traitor. But Bernard Arnault didn't hear any of it. Because while France raged, while protesters marched, while editorial writers sharpened their pens, Arnault was sitting in his office at 30 Avenue Montaigne, watching something unfold on the other side of Paris. Something that made the Boussac deal look like a warm-up exercise. In 1987, two of the most iconic luxury brands in France, Louis Vuitton and Moet Hennessy, merged to create LVMH, the largest luxury conglomerate in human history. A company so powerful, it controlled champagne, cognac, leather goods, fashion and perfume, the entire vocabulary of French elegance packed into a single corporate entity. And immediately, the two sides began to tear each other apart. One side was led by Henry Racamier, the 75-year-old patriarch who had personally transformed Louis Vuitton from a dusty trunk maker into a global luxury powerhouse. The other side was led by Alain Chevalier, the polished CEO who ran the Moet Hennessy, champagne and cognac empire with the efficiency of a Swiss watch. They hated each other with the kind of pure, refined, aristocratic fury that only French businessmen can produce. And in the middle of this war, both sides made the same catastrophic mistake. They invited Bernard Arnault to help. He walked into that boardroom as an ally. He walked out as the owner. And by the time either side realized what had happened, it was already irreversible. To understand the boardroom betrayal of 1988, you need to understand the merger that created LVMH and why it was doomed from the moment the ink dried. Louis Vuitton. The name alone carries a weight that few brands in human history can match. Founded in 1854 by a trunk maker who arrived in Paris at age 13 with nothing but the clothes on his back and the ambition of someone who had walked 292 miles from the Jura Mountains to get there. For over a century, the Vuitton name meant one thing: the finest luggage and leather goods in the world. Empress Eugénie, wife of Napoleon III, made Vuitton her personal trunk maker. Kings, emperors, movie stars, and railroad tycoons carried Vuitton trunks across continents. The monogram, that interlocking LV, designed in 1896 to prevent counterfeiting, was one of the most recognized symbols on Earth. But by the 1970s, Louis Vuitton had become sleepy. A family-owned company, beautifully crafted, but commercially passive. Revenue was modest, growth was flat. The brand lived on prestige and heritage, not profit and ambition. It was a sleeping giant. And sleeping giants in the world of business are prey. Then came Henry Racamier. Racamier was not a Vuitton by blood. He married into the family. His wife, Odile, was a direct descendant of the founder. But what Racamier lacked in heritage, he compensated for with a ferocious, steel-forged business instinct that was almost frightening in its intensity. Before joining Vuitton, he had been a CEO in the steel industry, an industry where you learn to survive by being harder than the product you sell. Under Racamier's leadership in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Louis Vuitton underwent a transformation that the luxury world had never seen before. He opened flagship stores in Tokyo, New York, London, Hong Kong, Munich, Geneva. He expanded the product line beyond trunks and luggage into handbags, wallets, and accessories. He introduced the concept of the luxury store as theater. Each boutique designed to make the customer feel like they were entering a palace, not a shop. Revenue went from 70 million francs to over 2 billion in less than a decade. The 2 billion. Racamier didn't just grow Louis Vuitton. He turned it into the most profitable luxury brand in the world. The margins were obscene. The growth was relentless. And the brand, that irreplaceable, unmeasurable, almost magical thing called the brand, was stronger than ever. But Racamier had a problem. One that kept him awake at night and made him pace the floors of his apartment on the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. He was brilliant at growth, but paranoid about control. He knew that as Vuitton grew larger, as its profits became more visible, as its share price climbed higher, it would become a target for hostile takeovers, for stock market raiders, for financial predators who saw luxury brands not as cultural treasures, but as spreadsheet opportunities. Predators exactly like the one who had just dismembered Boussac Saint-Frère across town. And so, in 1987, Racamier made a decision that he believed Racamier was old guard, conservative, family first. He believed luxury was about heritage, craftsmanship, and exclusivity. You didn't rush growth, you didn't cheapen the brand, and you absolutely, under no circumstances, let financiers anywhere near the boardroom. Luxury was sacred. It was not a commodity to be optimized. Chevalier was new guard, financial, global. He believed luxury was about scale, marketing, and shareholder value. He wanted to expand aggressively, take the company fully public, and use the stock market to fund a wave of acquisitions that would make LVMH even larger and more dominant. The merger agreement itself was a ticking bomb. Racamier and the Vuitton family retained operational control of the leather goods division, but the overall corporate structure gave slightly more voting power to the Moet Hennessy side. Neither man trusted the other. Neither man intended to be the junior partner. And neither man had any idea that their petty war for control was about to open the door for the most dangerous predator in French business. The fighting started almost immediately. Racamier and Chevalier clashed over strategy, over budgets, over executive appointments, over every decision, large and small. Board meetings became battlegrounds. Allies were recruited and abandoned. Lawyers were hired by the dozen. The French financial press began covering the LVMH internal war like it was a soap opera. Daily updates, anonymous sources, leaked memos, and dramatic headlines. Because, in many ways, it was a soap opera. Two powerful old men fighting over who gets to sit at the head of the table while the company they were supposed to be running drifted without direction. And this exact moment of weakness, this precise window of vulnerability, is where Bernard Arnault makes his entrance. In 1988, Arnault was 39 years old. He owned Christian Dior and the remains of the Boussac Empire. He had just proven, definitively, spectacularly, brutally, that he could buy a company, strip it to its core, and extract extraordinary value from what everyone else considered wreckage. He had cash. He had les Frères behind him. The shadow government of French capitalism, with its managing partner Antoine Bernheim pulling strings that lesser men didn't even know existed. And, most importantly, Arnault had something that neither Racamier nor Chevalier possessed: a complete, total, almost inhuman absence of sentimentality. Arnault didn't care about the Vuitton heritage. He didn't care about the Moet Hennessy champagne tradition. He didn't care about the personal feuds, the family pride, the bruised egos, or the aristocratic honor codes at war inside the LVMH boardroom. He cared about one thing. LVMH was the largest luxury group in the world. Its shares were depressed because of the internal fighting, and the two men who controlled it were so consumed by their war with each other that they couldn't see the wolf circling outside. The approach was subtle, elegant, quintessential. And then came the Guinness connection. This is the part of the story that sounds like a spy thriller, because it essentially was one. Guinness, the Irish brewing and spirits conglomerate, already held a significant stake in Moet Hennessy from a previous partnership deal. Back in 1987, before the merger with Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy had formed a strategic alliance with Guinness, giving the Irish company a meaningful block of shares. Their chairman was Anthony Tennant, a polished English businessman with deep connections to the European luxury and spirits establishment. Through Tennant, Arnault gained access to something that would change everything: Guinness's block of LVMH shares. The arrangement that Arnault and Bernheim constructed was a masterpiece of financial engineering, the same kind of intricate, multi-layered structure they had used to acquire Boussac, but far more sophisticated. Multiple holding companies, cross-shareholding arrangements, options, and convertible instruments that allowed Arnault to control shares without technically owning them on paper. Structures so layered, so opaque, that even the regulators at the Commission des Opérations de Bourse, France's securities watchdog, would struggle to see the full picture. But the essence, the cold, clean, devastating essence that an engineer's mind could reduce to a single equation, was simple. Arnault was building a controlling position in LVMH by combining three sources: his own direct purchases on the open market, the shares he could influence through the Guinness partnership, and the votes he had been promised by Racamier's camp, votes that Racamier had given him willingly as payment for his loyalty. It was the Boussac playbook, elevated to a level of sophistication that corporate France had never encountered. And so, the accumulation began, day by day, week by week, share by share. Arnault's team at Lazare executed purchases through different brokers, through different accounts, through the opaque channels that the Paris Bourse allowed in those less regulated, less transparent pre-digital days. In 1988, there was no Bloomberg terminal tracking every transaction in real time. There was no Twitter announcing positions. There was no instant regulatory disclosure. You could move quietly if you knew how. And nobody knew how better than Antoine Bernheim. Every evening, Arnault received a report, a simple number, his cumulative stake in LVMH. And every evening, that number climbed, silently, inexorably, like mercury in a thermometer on a summer day. 5%, the noise floor, nobody noticed. 8%, a few curious questions from analysts, nothing definitive. 12%, the Chevalier camp, the betrayal came in January 1989. Racamier called a board meeting. He was confident. He had his plan. He expected Arnault to vote with the Vuitton faction, to support his restructuring proposal, to back his bid to consolidate control, to stand beside him as a loyal partner against the Chevalier machine. He had invited the wolf into the house, and he expected the wolf to sit politely at the dinner table, eat what he was served, and be grateful for the invitation. Instead, Bernard Arnault revealed his true position. He didn't support Racamier. He didn't support Chevalier. He didn't support any faction, any compromise, any power-sharing arrangement. He supported himself. With 24% of LVMH and the structural support of the Guinness shares, Arnault declared himself the controlling shareholder. He demanded the chairman's seat. He demanded the right to appoint the board. He demanded complete, absolute, undivided control of the company that Racamier had spent 20 years building and that Chevalier had spent a decade managing. The room went silent, not the comfortable silence of consensus, the airless, suffocating silence of total shock. Racamier's face, according to people who were present that day, went through a sequence that nobody in that room would ever forget. White, then red, then something beyond color. The expression of a man who realizes that he has been completely, utterly, irreversibly destroyed by someone he trusted, by someone he had personally invited through the front door. Chevalier was equally stunned. He had assumed Arnault was Racamier's creature, a pawn in the old man's chess game. He never imagined that the pawn had been playing an entirely different game on an entirely different board. What followed was one of the most vicious legal battles in the history of French corporate law. A battle that would drag through multiple courts, consume hundreds of millions of francs in legal fees, and fill the front pages of Le Monde, Le Figaro, and Les Echos for over a year. Racamier fought with everything he had left: lawsuits, injunctions, emergency appeals to French commercial courts, appeals to the Tribunal de Commerce de Paris, appeals to the Cour d'appel. He petitioned the French government, the very politicians who had facilitated the original LVMH merger, begging them to intervene against what he called a hostile raider who had infiltrated the company under false pretenses. He went to the press. He gave interviews to every journalist who would listen, painting Arnault as a corporate pirate, a man without honor, a predator who had used a gentleman's agreement as a weapon of war. He called Arnault a raider. He called him a fraud. He accused him of collusion with Guinness. He accused him of market manipulation. He accused him of violating French securities law. Racamier even attempted to restructure LVMH itself, to issue new shares that would dilute Arnault's position, to create a poison pill, to find a white knight investor. He now controlled Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, Moet and Chandon, Dom Perignon, Hennessy, Veuve Clicquot, Givenchy, Kenzo, Christian Lacroix, and a dozen other luxury brands that represented the crown jewels of French civilization. The most precious names in the French language, names that took centuries to build, that survived world wars and revolutions and economic collapses, all now belong to one man. Henry Racamier was pushed out. The man who had built Louis Vuitton into a global brand, who had taken it from 70 million to 2 billion, was removed from his own company. He spent his remaining years fighting legal battles he could never win, writing bitter letters to newspapers that nobody read, and watching from the outside as Bernard Arnault transformed everything he had built into something even bigger, even more profitable, and completely unrecognizable. Racamier died in 2003, defeated, forgotten by everyone except the historians. Alain Chevalier was removed shortly after. The polished CO, who had managed Moet Hennessy with such sophistication and skill, was discarded like a used napkin. He had served his purpose, which, from Arnault's perspective, was simply to weaken Racamier enough that a third party could walk in and take everything. And Bernard Arnault, what did he do with his new empire? He did exactly what he always does. He went to work, and within months of taking control, Arnault began the systematic transformation of LVMH that would define the next 3 decades of global luxury. And the first thing he did surprised everyone. He didn't fire everyone. He didn't butcher LVMH the way he had butchered Boussac. There was nothing to strip here. Every brand in the portfolio was valuable. The problem wasn't waste. It was management. So he did something more surgical. He replaced the people at the top of each brand with his own selections. Younger, hungrier, more ambitious. He brought in designers who were willing to take risks. He hired marketers who understood global audiences, not just Parisian salons. He installed financial controllers in every division who reported directly to him, not to the creative directors, not to the brand presidents, but to Arnault himself. But here's the key. The thing that made Arnault's approach different from every other corporate conglomerate in history. He never